Should we then be looking at maybe fine-tuning our own laws in the fight against drugs, hard drugs, to the extent that it would sort of slow down those who go out to tarnish the image of the country? Because almost in every execution yearly,
yes,
is a Nigerian being executed anytime executions are carried out concerning drugs in some of the Asian nations.
It is alleged to be a Nigerian. I'm not terribly convinced that in every case that an African or a black African is arrested overseas, that they are actually bona fide Nigerians. The argument, and there was some confusion in this case as to whether or not one of the four was indeed a Nigerian.
Yes, because of the passports.
Because of the passports that the passport that he was carrying. So I'm not so sure that in every case we haven't become soft targets, as it were, because our travel papers are perhaps easier to procure than others. Maybe we have, like you rightly pointed out, some reputation for engaging in this sort of business, but I'm not terribly convinced in all cases that these are Nigerians. And this is also apparent from the indication that only one of them actually insisted on his body being conveyed back home. The other three made no such stipulation. It may be a personal preference, but it may also be because they're not Nigerians.
Can that be, I think our government has now requested the body of the Nigerians involved to be brought back home.
If they are Nigerians, yes. I mean, I think they need to ascertain that first.
First and foremost.
I think they need to ascertain that first. It would seem strange that a Nigerian, having the choice to do so, will not elect for his remains to be flown back home. It's at no cost to you.
Because culturally, almost every Nigerian would love to see that his remains are flown back home. And if you had that opportunity and the others didn't catch in on it before their final moments, I think you seem to have a point there, that they just might not be.
But do you think it could be a thing of pride as well, or disgrace in terms of who would want to have the remains? Would the family be happy to have the bodies of people who were involved in this crime?
They were found culpable as a result of an adversarial system of justice. There are two sides to an adversarial system of justice. It's all based on evidence. It's all based on proof. Yes, they've been convicted of these crimes. It is not to say that they have not reformed their character. And everybody is allowed a second chance, which is really a primary argument against the death penalty, in the sense that part of the purpose of punishment is also to be able to rehabilitate. And in that case, then that defeats the argument as to whether or not having been born again or having been radicalized or whatever they've done in prison, they would now feel some level of shame for their remains to go back home. It was at no cost to them. I'm a bit bewildered why three of them would not have indicated.
That's on the one hand. The second is, at what point do you think that local laws take the back seat, international laws swing into action, or international laws take the back seat and local laws stand? In matters of crime, such as, say, for instance, terrorism, drug trafficking, in some instances, xenophobia. Do you think that international laws should be used more, or local laws should be allowed to apply?
Well, countries are at liberty as to whether or not they sign on to various international conventions. When you do choose to sign on to an international convention, you're bound by the requirements of that international obligation. Many a time, you have to now domesticate those international laws within your own context. When there's a conflict between your domestic law and international law prevails. Because, of course, you have taken steps to ratify those international conventions. Now, what we see here is not the subject of international law. This is domestic law, domestic criminal law, applicable in the country, be it South Africa or Indonesia or Nigeria. Unless, to the extent that there are international conventions that have been signed up by that country, and unless there is a conflict between the international convention and the domestic law, then that will be resolved in favor of the international convention.
The reason I ask this also is it's not just because of the incident of, the drug incidents,
Correct.
the convictions. It's also because of the invitation by a civil society organization of the ICC to investigate the issue of xenophobia in South Africa because they are signatory to the Rome Statute. You ask, what about the local courts? You don't think that local courts could do a good job in that sort of case? Do you think the ICC could step in?
The ICC's role, it has to be understood, merely complements that of domestic jurisdictions. In other words, the domestic jurisdiction has primacy over offenses that are triable at the international court. So if they are taking active steps to prosecute those crimes within their jurisdiction, the ICC would not intervene. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the requisite country has to be a state party, has to be a member of the ICC before cases can be referred to the ICC. If it's not a member, it's only the UN Security Council that can refer a case to the prosecutor of the ICC. So there are quite a few hurdles to overcome. Now, going back to the issue of xenophobia in South Africa, xenophobia in itself is not a criminal offense, at least as far as I know. There would be other crimes like murder or manslaughter or grievous bodily harm and all that, which will be triable under South African law. So in that sense, the South African legal procedure will be triggered to deal with such domestic crimes.
Okay, so what do you make then of the invitation of the local NGO? Because I think they asked the ICC to investigate the comments of the Zulu King, which was thought to have incited, the issue or the instance of xenophobia in that instance, and it was seen that the ICC has accepted.
Well, the ICC would not reject any overtures made to it. You're free to write to the prosecutor of the ICC and ask for her intervention in certain matters. But there are only two methods of triggering the ICC's jurisdiction. It's either that country itself refers the cases of xenophobia to the ICC, or the prosecutor of the ICC herself decides to wade in, or the UN Security Council refers the matter to the prosecutor. So there are only three ways to do it. Writing a letter to the prosecutor of the ICC at best may trigger some interest on her part to open an investigation. Now, let's deal with the crime itself. Direct and public incitement is pretty much what they would have written, because it's an international crime to actually incite others to commit crimes. Now, if it is true, yes, she would be able to open an investigation. It's called a preliminary investigation into the alleged crimes in South Africa, but she has to decide that herself.
So if South Africa don't refer the case and says, we're not interested in taking this case to the ICC, what happens?
Because
then if the ICC wants to intervene?
No, the ICC would only intervene if South Africa is unable or unwilling to prosecute the perpetrators of those offenses themselves domestically. The ICC has a complementary role. It doesn't have primacy over it. It's only when the country, can be shown to be unable or unwilling to do it that it triggers off the ICC.
So the same thing would apply in the case of Nigeria when during that period for elections where people were talking about taking cases to the ICC and things like that.
Correct. If we had, God forbid, but if we had post-election violence here, the perpetrators of the post-election violence would have been referred to the ICC by our Attorney General, or the prosecutor of the ICC on her own would have decided to open an investigation in the case of Nigeria. It wouldn't have been done by just mere letters.
Because the way they went about it, it looked as though, ICC was going to come in immediately when they referred those cases to them. They just come whisk the people away and then the cases begin.
No,
it doesn't work
It's
like
slightly more complicated than that.
So how much knowledge do you think that, the average person needs about international laws, or even maybe knowledge about the laws of the country that one could be going to? Because you could be caught in a web and not know.
Well, Honorable Abike Dabiri made a very interesting point when she was interviewed on this matter 2 days ago. And she says, well, the moment I landed in Indonesia, I saw on every wall at the airport that drug trafficking was punishable by death. There is probably no better way to raise public awareness than that. You know, when you go into their territory, that this is the penalty for it. And honestly, having been confronted with that notice, you almost do it at your own peril. And that's what the Indonesians are saying.
Okay, we'll take a real quick moment and take a look at the headline news, but we'll come back and examine some other matters here. Nata, morning.